So I'm going to be talking about the blockchain first. If anybody wants to go ahead and get started downloading the blockchain, you can download the code from here, bitcoin.org/en/download. There's some setup nodes instructions here, and we'll come back to this page. And if you're downloading the blockchain, it could take days if you don't use a torrent file. So find the bootstrap.dat torrent file, place it in your .bitcoin directory, and one of those torrent files is available here. So why use Bitcoin? Bitcoin is an interesting piece of technology. It was a breakthrough in distributed consensus. So you have computers everywhere across the world. How do you get them to agree on the state of one thing? So a direct example for Bitcoin is it handles money. It handles transfer of value. So, if this person is A and this person is B, and we're all sharing a distributed ledger, like a bank account balance, something that says, A has 50 bucks, B has 30 bucks. How do you prevent someone like B being malicious and saying, well, actually, I don't have 30 bucks, I have 30 million bucks. And so this is what Bitcoin solves. This is the breakthrough of the blockchain. With Bitcoin, things are faster, cheaper than banks. It's faster because banks typically take about 2 days to process a transaction. There's many reasons for this. They're just kind of slow. They've been around for thousands of years, running a lot of the same practices for those times. And even in the internet age, they still have antiquated methodologies. Bitcoin is really banking for the internet. So transactions, if you don't consider them instantaneous, you might want to wait for a transaction or two, especially for very large value items. But even then, it's about 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes for 3 confirmations, which is very solid in Bitcoin. And compare that to banks, that is days faster. And it's cheaper too. Banks, typical, if you're doing like a ACH deposit, it'll probably be like 15 cents or so. With Bitcoin, just to transfer money anywhere, everybody has direct access to the blockchain. Anybody can do it. And you have to pay a miner's fee, but it costs about a penny or two. And sometimes it can be free depending on which Bitcoin you're sending. Another reason why Bitcoin is interesting, in my opinion, I was talking about my interest in financial policy earlier. Bitcoin is really most of the governments in the world are letting Bitcoin happen. They think it's an interesting technology. They think it's an interesting way to transfer value. And it's also interesting in that it's deflationary. There will be a set number of Bitcoin, about 21 million, about 100 years from now. And it's being mined slowly. Compare that with the US dollar, which has about 40 billion new dollars printed every month. That's the quantitative easing. It's also happening in Europe. And so what this does is it inflates the monetary supply. And that means that there's just more dollar bills circling around. But the value then goes down. If there are more bills, then the value of each bill goes down. And so that's what inflation does. Bitcoin, even though it's being printed right now, so right now it's inflationary, the concept of it being defined at what rate it will be created and when it will level off and when no more will be created sets up an interesting financial policy where nobody has control over it. Nobody can dictate, okay, we need to go to war. We need like 40 billion more dollars to go send to the troops and to pay for armaments and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot into that. And for time's sake, let's move on.
Quick question.
Yeah.
What is it that prevents there from being more Bitcoin? Is that just built into the algorithm that just can't go beyond?
Good question. It's built into the code of Bitcoin, and it's open source, so everybody has access to it. And everybody who runs a node or a miner runs that code. And so I'll get into the consensus model, but what it would take for there to push beyond that limit is an edit to a piece of very low-level code in Bitcoin that people are, at least right now, very vehemently for this set limit of Bitcoin. To increase that would be to take away a lot of the value of Bitcoin. And so it'd be, I think, an insurmountable effort to try to get around that.
Makes sense.
So this distributed consensus model that I was talking about allows computers all over the world to agree on one thing. And for Bitcoin, that's a distributed ledger. And so a ledger is just transactions. So we'll say A, oh no, A paid B, 1.6 Bitcoin. B paid C 1.3 Bitcoin, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this list goes on and on and on. And Bitcoin right now, it's dozens of gigabytes. And so all that data, distributed consensus, everybody in the world agrees on it. And why does everybody agree on it? Yeah.
What namespace do A, B, and C come from? How are they identified? Are they public keys, email addresses?
Yeah, so these are public keys, which are in the form of addresses. And so a lot of things in Bitcoin are hashed, usually hashed twice. And so there's like a SHA-256 hash and then a RIPE 160 hash on that. And so A is represented, usually the Bitcoin addresses start with a 1 if it's a regular blockchain network. And so it could be 1BC A 9 capital Z lowercase r N to X. And this would be about 30 to 34 characters long. And so that's just an address specifying kind of like an account. And somebody can have however many addresses they want. For every address, there's an associated public key and an associated private key. And that private key is what allows you to send these transactions. And so you are the only one who has access to that private key, hopefully. And by signing those transactions with your private key, you're saying, yes, I am the one who did it. So this distributed consensus model, like I said, allows for everybody to agree on one thing. And how this works is complicated, and we'll eventually arrive at it. I think we'll first start with these nodes and peers. So we'll say each of these are a node in the network. And everybody in the world is on the same Bitcoin network, at least in this case. And so they're all sending transactions to each other. So, a transaction gets sent to here. It's a peer-to-peer network. And so they distribute these transactions to each other, to their connections. So B might send a transaction, and it might propagate through the network to get to everybody. So these transactions are just floating around. And then certain ones, called miners, let's say D is a miner. Miners are helping verify transactions and then trying to solve a difficult problem to do a sort of proof of work to make it another insurmountable challenge to fool the rest of the network into fraudulent transactions. So how that works is when a miner is mining, it takes a whole bunch of the transactions that are floating in its mempool. And so this, it could be 100 different transactions. It takes them, and basically what it does is it tries to hash them all together with some random nonces to get them below a certain difficulty level. And so if the difficulty is really hard, the final hash has to be less than that really low difficulty number. So this hash could be like 0.0000000, and it goes on and on. But what it has to do is this final hash, which can't really be predicted, can only be run and then tested, needs to be below this number. And so these miners are running very specialized hardware to run hashes over and over again very fast. So this miner is doing it, and let's say A is a miner and they're doing it too. So they're competing every 10 minutes about to get the next block. And what that means is when somebody finally gets a hash that's below that difficulty, they can take all the transactions that were within it, make it a block, basically, and then distribute it back to the other nodes. And so this is the block. Everybody else does a quick verification to make sure it's legit. And then that block of transactions goes onto the blockchain. And this blockchain is what it sounds like. It's a list of these blocks of transactions that had to be very brute force computed to get that hash below the difficulty. And some interesting things about these blocks is that the algorithm in Bitcoin tries to make it so a block is created every 10 minutes. And so it analyzes the network, figures out, okay, people are getting these blocks in about 9 minutes. Let's increase the difficulty a little bit. Or people are getting these blocks in like 12 minutes, so let's decrease the difficulty a little bit. I think that happens every 2 weeks. And so the Bitcoin network is constantly adjusting itself so that a block is created every 10 minutes. Now these guys are doing a lot of work, and so they get paid for their work. So whenever these new blocks are created, right now they get 25 Bitcoin. So that is a lot of money. But don't go trying to mine on your own. There's probably $1 billion worth of miners out there in the world, and you're not going to compete with them on your own. What you can do is join a large mining pool, but even then, if your pool wins, you'll get a very, very small share of that winning. So I generally say stay away from mining, unless you just want a space heater. But if you want to get into it, there are places where you can research and learn, and invest some money into trying to win those.
Now the hardware is all specialized.
Yeah, I was going to say, do people still use GPUs, or is it only ASICs now?
I believe it's only ASICs.
Yeah.
But if someone mines, they could. Yeah.
So the miners are verifying the blockchains, are creating them, and they're getting paid for this. And as you said, there's a finite amount of Bitcoins getting created.
Yeah.
So when we hit that point, what's the point of miners continuing to do this work? And will Bitcoin fail at that point because no one's creating blockchains?
Thank you for asking that. So these guys are getting rewarded. Now, when we, say, okay, we're done producing Bitcoin, how are these miners going to be incentivized to protect the network? And how that works right now is, well, this 25, it didn't always used to be 25 Bitcoin. It used to be a lot more, and it gets halved every something like 200,000 blocks. And so it used to be like 100 Bitcoin, and then 50 Bitcoin, now 25 Bitcoin, and then depending on how fast the next blocks are mined, I believe the next one is set for the middle of next year, where it's going to go down to 12.5 Bitcoin. And so what this does with the number of Bitcoin ever mined is it goes like this, where this is time on the bottom axis. This is 2009, That's right? As it goes on, I think 2140 is when the last Bitcoin is going to be mined. And so it's not exactly 21 million. I can't remember if it's just under 21 million or just under 22 million. But we'll say 21. It's an arbitrary number because it's the value of each Bitcoin that matters. And so we're about actually right around here. Not made to scale, but here we are, I think at about 2/3. Bitcoin is already mined. And so it's going to keep getting halved and keep going on. These miners, to get back to your question, these miners not only incentivized on the creation of new Bitcoin, they're incentivized on miners' fees. And so they're like, thank you, miner, for protecting the network. Which I haven't got into yet. But thank you, miner, for protecting the network. Here's a transaction. I'm going to, this transaction from B to C that was 1.3 Bitcoin. Miner, I'm also going to give you 0.0002 Bitcoin. And that's to incentivize the miner to be like, oh, he's going to give me 0.002 Bitcoin. I'm going to include him in my next block. And so when he wins the block, that 0.0002 Bitcoin goes from B to D, the miner. And so everybody sends little miners' fees. And when a whole bunch of people are doing it, it actually adds up to something significant. In the future, we're not quite sure how it's going to go, but hopefully there will be so many people using the blockchain, miners' fees can still be very little. If there's not very many people using the blockchain, the miners' fees are going to be very high to encourage continued mining because it costs so much money to do it. Yeah.
Doesn't the whole fundamental depend on the value of the Bitcoin remaining high? As if there's a finite amount and the transaction fees are paid to the winning miner, but the difficulty increases over time, then more hardware will be required to mine for the blocks.
Mm-hmm.
So if the price doesn't remain high, then there would be an incentive for people to continue mining with it.
It's a complicated market like that. If the price, completely collapses and they're not getting enough miners' fees, yeah, we would see a whole bunch of mining operations just shut down because they're not profitable. But what that would also do is decrease this difficulty level because so many close down. And so it actually make it so maybe that you or I could start mining again. And so even though, yeah, they're shutting down, but it becomes cheaper for Bitcoin network to keep mining. Yeah.
I have a question about the difficulty level adjustment. So there's no centralized authority deciding this level, right?
Right.
So does that mean that each individual miner is taking a look at how often he's receiving new blocks, and based on that rate, each miner is deciding the difficulty level that they're using?
Yeah, it's actually part of the Bitcoin code that runs on all these machines. That everybody says, okay, here's the next difficulty level. So if someone tries to cheat the system and says, oh, I did it, I got under the difficulty level, and this was the difficulty level, it's higher than everyone else's. Everybody else is going to see that and be like, that's BS, I'm not going to accept that block.
And it won't be included in the blockchain, and so it's as if that person never even mined that because they faked the difficulty.
Yep.
They're yelling in the woods.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, not an expert on this, but all this is based on hashing and private keys and so forth.
Yeah.
Quantum technologies
Yes.
are supposedly going to be good at circumventing all that
Right.
and making it easy.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll probably have that by 2140.
Yeah.
So how does that play into this?
Then we switch our hashing algorithm
Okay.
to something
So
that is
they-
quantum resistant.
Okay, so they anticipated that.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. In fact, that was a question I had. There's a crypto term that I forget, but protocol flexibility, protocol adaptability.
Mm-hmm.
Things can be replaced with new, safer versions if need be?
Yes, so the Bitcoin core, that's what it's called. Bitcoin core code is always being updated. There's a handful of core developers who are paid by like the Bitcoin Foundation, or they're paid, sponsored by another Bitcoin company. And anybody can actually help, but there's only a handful of main core developers.
Core developers are now on MIT's payroll.
Yeah,
as of
thank you.
This week.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so, what was the question again?
The protocol adaptability.
All right, protocol adaptability. So they're constantly updating it. I think right now we're on 0.10 something, and that's constantly being updated. And people adopt the new code and then run that, and it's all open source, so everybody can review the changes. And so what we can do is, the core developers to get together and say, hey, I heard my colleague just developed a new quantum hash break algorithm. I think we really need to get this fix out before my colleague publishes paper. And so, they'll talk on the IRC channels, and I'll coordinate and talk with the miners too, because the miners are usually a little slower to update because they're running more specialized software. So they'll get everybody to buy in on the change, and then everybody does it. And so this guy right here could be running 0.10, this one could be running 0.9, this one 0.8, etc. But the core rules of Bitcoin pretty much remain the same. And if there's ever a big change that is incompatible with old versions, I think what would be required is a hard fork.
Yeah.
That would say, after this point, you have to be using Bitcoin version 1.12 or higher. And so what will happen is, so we'll say 2 blocks are mined, this one with 1.12 and this one with old ones. Blocks will keep getting mined by different people in the network, and different people will accept their preferred versions. But the one that wins out, the one that remains the longest, is the one that wins. So there's always possible that we could have multiple chains going on, but whichever is the longest one is the one that everybody accepts. And then you could customize the new code to only accept these versions and just kick out the old versions automatically. Yeah.
So just back to the protocol adaptability and the sort of automatic adaptation of difficulty based on the feedback received through the network. So does that then go into the 51% problem that I've heard of if you have a 51% stake as a network, you could arbitrarily modify either the cipher being used or change the difficulty yourself, and because you own a significant stake as a network, validate it to a point where it is believed to be true?
I don't know if you could change the difficulty or if it'd even be necessary in a 51% attack. So first I have to preface with the 51% attack is this attack on Bitcoin, the blockchain, that says if you control over 51% of the blockchain network, then you control the transactions. It's not quite true. It's somewhat of an overhyped problem. But how it basically goes is this. If you want to double spend, so say E is paying A for a brand new car, and so they're going to pay them $60,000 in Bitcoin. So the Bitcoin equivalent to this. And so they pay it to A, and A gives E the car, and E drives away. Simultaneously, E spends, let's say that he goes to E2. Well, this diagram is not quite accurate, but we'll try to get the point across. So he actually sends in another duplicate transaction this $60,000 worth of Bitcoin to E2, which belongs to E. It's just another one of E's addresses. So he sent 2 transactions to the Bitcoin network. one for $60,000 worth to A, and one for $60,000 worth of the same Bitcoin to E2. And then because he owns so much of the network, he starts mining as fast as he can, and he wants this transaction to get into the blockchain, but not that one. And so he's fooling A into giving him a car and just moving the money to E2. It's a double spend, and you need to be very powerful in the network to be able to do that. You need to beat all the other miners in the system to get this transaction in the next block, mine the next block, put it on the blockchain, and then start stacking other blocks on top of that to make sure that's cemented in. But it's extremely hard to do. Even with 51% control of the network, you have 51% chance of getting the next block. Getting 2 blocks in a row, it's more like 25%. And it's just incredibly resource intensive to pull off, and not worth it actually for anything really, because it costs hundreds of millions of dollars.
Well, they'd know who did it too.
Yeah, you'd be able to find it right away. Yeah.
Oh, which brings up my question, which is, are attacks detectable if the NSA secretly decided, cost no object, they want to destroy faith in the Bitcoin network?
Yeah, could they pull that off with long haul,
Long haul?
which is their cryptography breaking supercomputer?
I don't know too much about that. Anybody want to speak up?
I don't know, but there's some helicopters coming in outside.
I would guess not. The Bitcoin is used by hackers all around the world and in black markets around the world to securely transfer money over the internet. And money is like the most solid reward a hacker can have for completing their hack. This Bitcoin is just like money sitting there, and hackers will try to break into people's computers to get it, but it has not been broken. It has withstood the test of 6 years of hackers around the world trying to break it. Hasn't worked. It's one of those just crazy things that people thought, this isn't going to work. Satoshi Nakamoto was who invented Bitcoin. He was like, his arguments were thrown out. It's like, no way, no, you can't make that. You can't make Bitcoin work that way. You can't make digital money work that way. It doesn't work. But then he built it and then showed the world. Gradually, people started using it. Hackers started getting into it, but no one was able to.
So what about the scalability of Bitcoin?
Scalability is an issue, but it's not an issue at the same time because it's being worked on. Gavin Anderson. So one of the scalability things is these miners are actually incentivized to use less transactions in their block, to keep less transactions, because when they find a block, they want to distribute it to the rest of the network as fast as they can. And they can do that with a 100 kilobyte block faster than a 5 megabyte block.
Obviously.
Gavin Anderson, one of the core developers, he's developed a way to make block distribution time the same regardless of size of the block, to help those miners fit as many transactions as blocks as they can.
Because it's not just cache locality, but you have to run the hash block part for every 500 and so byte. Anyway, that's a tough shot to how one works.
Yeah. So yeah, I think scalability it's an issue right now, but it shouldn't be an issue soon. Yes.
Is there a minimum block size, like a certain number of transactions that's enforced?
I don't think it's enforced. I think
So
I've seen them with like one.
They could be hashing one transaction, call it a block, and ship it out, and everyone would be cool with it.
Yep.
Huh.
Yep, they want that 25 Bitcoin.
Right. Of
Really,
course,
really
the
bad.
miners' fees would be pretty good.
Yeah, they're not really helping the network, but it happens.
Oh.
I should probably move on. So, we're just getting to blocks. We did blocks. Transactions, they're pretty simple. A transaction is basically it takes something like this and then something like this and puts it together. So a transaction, we'll say, to describe this transaction from B to C, 1.3 Bitcoin, you'd have a transaction, it'd have a hash, it'd have internal scripting in this transaction that gets sent so everybody can verify it. And it's actually a very limited type of scripting code that is used by all the miners and all the verifiers to process transactions. And so here's one, it's opdupe, op hash 160, here's a hash, and then op equal verify, op check sig. And it does that in a stack. So it puts these on a stack, runs each, I guess, word of code with the appropriate parameters, and I don't have time to get into it. But it, so this very limited code gets sent along with each transaction. Most transactions are exactly the same. With things like multi-sig, they could be more complicated. And so that allows, this is actually, if you want to develop on the blockchain, like on the blockchain, learn this stuff. But that's actually pretty advanced. So to go into transactions, we'll have a hash, we'll have the that code, and we'll have transaction inputs and outputs, things that the other things can verify. And so this input will be this A to B for 1.6 Bitcoin. And these are actually addresses. And then B to C of 1.3 Bitcoin would be a B out. So it's going to take 1.3 of this, and then it has to use all the inputs. So where do the rest go? Well, they probably go to a change address for B, so like if you are paying for a coffee and it costs $3.50 and you hand them a $5, $1.50 comes back to you. So the change right here, which would be 0.3 Bitcoin, would just go into one of these addresses. And all of these A, B, C, or yeah, A, B, B1, B2, C, those are all addresses.
What if there
We're
be
just not
miners
writing them out.
too?
Yes, there'd be a fee. And that would be, if this change was not presented right here, this 0.03 Bitcoin, then the miners would assume that is their fee. And so that's a mistake a lot of people have done, where they give the miner that much Bitcoin for processing the transaction.
Yeah.
It was mostly old clients that allowed you to not set an output address.
Yeah. Okay. So getting started with the blockchain, that's where you go to download it. You can go to GitHub and build it yourself, check out the code. Setting up the node instructions. So a node is any one of these guys. It's a Bitcoin daemon that's talking to other peers, processing transactions, sending them to each other. It's not a miner. I personally haven't set up a miner, so don't ask me. But I'm sure other people in the room have. Raise your hand if you've set up a miner before. There's who to talk to.
Talk to me, it's been a long time.
And then setting up your node, you'll have to edit this bitcoin.conf file. And so this is just in the root directory of your Bitcoin directory. And here's all the parameters, a URL, helpful URL for what parameters to use. The basics of what you need are RPC user and RPC password. I like to put print to console on there. And if you use TX index, you'll want to do that before you download the blockchain. What it does is it indexes all the transactions so that you can, say, where is this transaction, what block is it in, and it keeps a database of, oh, this transaction is in block 100,962. And if you don't do TX index, it won't do that. So that can be very useful in crawling the blockchain, or just querying to certain parts of it really quickly. If you do that, you need to run reindex equals 1, and you do that when you're running Bitcoin D. And if you are developing, you probably want to say testnet equals 1 or regtest equals 1. And so testnet is the same thing as Bitcoin, but with play money. And so everybody around the world is using play Bitcoin money instead of real Bitcoin. And regtest is the Bitcoin network is just all right there on your own local system, and you can process blocks really quickly. So Bitcoin Core, which is the code from that website I was just showing you, that has Bitcoin D in it, Bitcoin daemon, Bitcoin command line interface, and Bitcoin Qt, which is the GUI interface for Bitcoin. So running Bitcoin D, you'll see something like this, where it's setting up. For Linux, it's often your home Bitcoin directory is usually in home, your username .bitcoin. And if you're going to do it, remember that I think it's over 40 gigabytes now. I use an external hard drive for it. You just want to make sure you have enough space for it.
So isn't that part of the scalability issues? Is not making that so big?
That's what
I
pruning
mean, it
is
obviously
for.
has to continue growing, but
So that's what pruning is for. I read something recently, they've merged some feature in, which means you can actually run a node, not a miner, not, I mean, it's obviously gonna have some limitations that
Okay.
will only use, I think he said like a gig or and a half.
okay, because when I used it, you had to have the whole thing. And
Yeah, and
Turned
I
it
mean,
off.
I still have the whole thing on mine. I just recently saw something relating to that. I don't know the
Yeah.
full details.
Yeah, Merkle tree pruning is right in the Bitcoin white paper.
Yeah.
Yeah. Satoshi thought about that one.
Yeah. There's also Bitcoin services you can use. So you can talk to other people running nodes without having to download the whole blockchain yourself. And there's light wallets you can use. So in addition to online services, you can use something like Electrum, which is a Bitcoin wallet that talks to other nodes that have the whole blockchain installed. So I'll just show you guys a few example things in Bitcoin D real quick. So over here, I am running the blockchain network, Bitcoin D, and it's constantly making connections, dropping connections with other peers. It looks like I'm connected to about 13 other peers. It shows their IP addresses, whatnot. The code that they're running, this is 10.1. And then when we get new blocks, it'll let me know right here. And if you're waiting for like a transaction to be verified, then you can verify that it's been verified. And so that was just running it Bitcoin D. I can then use the Bitcoin CLI to do something like get balance. And so Bitcoin D has a wallet in it. I personally wouldn't recommend it. I think that there's better wallets. This was the first one. It's a really basic one. More so, this code is about having a node. And so this is a fresh wallet. I don't have any Bitcoin in it. And that's a good point right there. It shows my balance in this many zeros. Because it's a digital currency, we don't have to be limited by what's reasonable within a pocket. Bitcoin goes to the 100 millionth decimal place. So that's 8 decimal places. So you don't have to buy, right now a value of one Bitcoin is like 230 bucks. You don't have to buy one whole Bitcoin. You can buy even, well, these services won't allow it, but you can have 100 millionth of Bitcoin. and that would cost much,
Nothing.
100 million, like 230.
Less than a penny now.
What's that?
Less than a penny now.
Yeah, definitely. I think most online services, if you try to buy it online, Coinbase is a really nice, easy way to buy it online, to hook up to your bank account. I think the minimum they'll do is like $2 worth of Bitcoin. Yeah.
So with the CLI, I guess you can query your history of transactions. Or that.
Yes.
And what does it show in the transaction?
Yeah, let's do that. Okay, let's see if Bitcoin CLI, I think get best block. Okay, let me look at the APIs real quick. So here is a very handy website that shows the API calls list. And you can interface this. It's over HTTP, RPC, and JSON. Or you can just use the Bitcoin CLI. And so I think get best block hash. So this will get us the latest block. So there's our hash. So we'll copy that. And then it's probably get block, yep. So there's, let me print that to file. So here's the output of the latest block. And so it has a hash for the block. It says how many confirmations there were. It's the latest block, so just one. And that just means how many blocks are there on top of it. We got the size, the height. This is the 353,684th block. We have a Merkle root. And this is a list of all the transaction hashes that are included in it. So we're paging down. A lot of transactions. We got time. We have the nonce used in it, and the bits difficulty level, chain work, and previous block hash. So then you can go from each block to the previous one, and when the next one comes, you'd have a next block hash.
Is that chain work also a SHA-1? Because that's incredibly, that's a lot of zeros.
Yeah, honestly, I'm not sure what the chain work is. Anybody know what that is? Google it
That's
real
pretty
quick.
impressive, all those zeros, if that's really a SHA-1.
Yeah. Well, that could be what it is. Yeah, there's mining farms full of miners, more powerful that can, like one of them can do it better than your GPU. And there's warehouses full of these things constantly on the Bitcoin. And all over the world, only one wins every 10 minutes.
Are governments getting interested in this?
Yeah, yeah. I don't know anything like hard facts on that, but I hear that China and India are interested in trying to manipulate the market and trying to mine Bitcoin because they see its future worth.
A tiny little Eastern European country that recently seceded that made from its parent country that made Bitcoin its official currency. I think the size of their country is only a few square kilometers.
Yeah, you gotta start
Yeah,
somewhere.
that's the no man's land between the Czech and yeah.
So I'm going to take this random transaction and we're going to say Bitcoin CLI get raw transaction. We're going to paste this hash, and it takes one more parameter, which is verbose, and say 1. And here's all the data in that transaction. So here's where it started. And so we have the hex that represents all the transaction, and then all of the rest of it is that hex decoded. So we have that transaction ID. Here's the VIN, which was right here, talking about its inputs. And so it says, I have an input from this transaction ID, another one, and then
the amount. That's what we want.
Yeah. Where's the amount? Scroll down, and then we say we are outputting 1.65 Bitcoin. Here's the code to run the transaction. And there's its destination address. And then here's another output to another address.
It's probably the change.
Yep, probably exchange address.
And then where's the mining?
I believe the mining fee is unspecified outputs. So it's not explicitly stated. But all of the inputs can be read from up here, and you'd have to look at these transaction IDs to see what those amounts were. Yeah?
I'm still a bit confused. Where's the change coming from?
The change?
Yeah, you say that it has a change output.
So,
From the previous transaction?
yeah, so,
one block, right? So if I'm getting this right, your balance, B's balance, because A gave B 1.6 Bitcoin, and in that same block, B gave C 1.3 Bitcoin. 0.3 is the difference between those that B keeps,
So
that
if-
they paid out.
So if there's a transaction from A to B and B never does another transaction anywhere in the blockchain, you should never have any change.
That sounds right.
Okay, because it was just the way, the example I made may be a little wrong, but the one you said there's 0.3 change, and that was because B gave the C, but I was thinking that if it was A gave the C, and then D gave to E, and the change came from the previous transaction, someone would just start taking money from the previous transaction. So I was confused on that.
so change addresses exist, or just these, change output transactions exist, so that you don't have to give somebody, you don't have to transfer all the input to a single destination. So every transaction has inputs, and you have to use all of the inputs in your transaction. So in this case, this transaction I was describing, this was the input, and so 1.6 Bitcoin, all of it had to be used. And so, but B only wanted to pay C 1.3. And so he just sends 0.3 of that to another one of his addresses to spend all of it.
We're
But he's
combining
already
multiple
spent it all.
transactions into one transaction. That's confusing.
Basically, the books have to be balanced in the block.
Yeah.
And so, for the books to be balanced in the block, B is going to have 0.3 Bitcoin more than the more than the 1.3 he spent.
So when you create a wallet, you have to create essentially two accounts. You have to create the account you're putting money out from, and then the change account where the change goes to. Correct?
Typically, you have infinite
yourself, you
number of
consider yourself
accounts.
as your change address.
Okay, so you just essentially have a balance of yourself.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Do you know why the block needs to, balance all of that?
Yeah, why every transaction needs to spend all its inputs? I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think it keeps things
makes the
simpler.
accounting easier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You only have to go one step back to look up those two in transaction, how much money is there. That's
That
the
way they're
thing.
not all.
You don't have then to go back from
Tangled.
there, back from there, back from there, etc.
That makes
You go
sense.
just one
So
time.
this is only important if the single entity does more than one transaction in the chain. The balancing.
Yeah, and often they do.
Well, if I do one transaction to one payment and I don't make another payment until the train is done, I've only done one transaction. So if you only had, in the transaction of the chain, if only A gave to B,
Mm-hmm.
is that considered spending all of his input?
So when A gave B 1.6 Bitcoin, A had to have 1.6 Bitcoin already.
in his wallet, but it's not in the chain.
It is in the chain. So if
Previously
anybody,
in the chain.
has any Bitcoin, it's in the blockchain.
Okay.
The point is the only way to split up an amount is to use change. So in the previous block, A received 1.6 Bitcoin. And with that block that he received 1.6, he can't spend 1.3 of it. He has to spend the entire amount and then change back the remainder. And so this is how you split the money up. And then to combine it, you have to combine previous blocks. And there could still be change that you can specify exact amounts. But in order to specify exact amounts, you have to specify the change in the block. It doesn't automatically calculate that for you.
Well, miners will, but they'll take it.
There's your motivation.
$20 on the ground.
Yeah.
How does it ever get combined back together again? Or doesn't this just cause ever increasing entropy over time and lots of little fractional pieces get
This
created?
actually prevents that from happening.
Who can combine?
You can send all those small amount to one Bitcoin address. That would combine all of them into one.
Yes.
Yeah, whenever you're sending them out, you send an amount from a specific block. Or I guess you could send it from multiple blocks, but you probably reference the exact block that you're sending, that you receive that money, and the balance comes from a specific block.
Yes, and to minor correction, it'd be specifying transaction hashes. And so these are VOUTs, but the VINs up here are describing transaction IDs. And so each of these transactions has a transaction ID associated with it. And so they're saying, this is where my inputs come from. Yeah, this is, and then to these addresses are where they're going. I'm going to call this new transaction, and it was up at the top there, some other transaction ID hash.
So to equate this to like a double ledger system, each of those is a ledger entry then?
Yes, exactly. And as for things like spreading out, yeah, you can then take, 100 different addresses and then combine them all into one. Likewise, you can take one address and split its contents into 100 different addresses. And because of the domain area size of blockchain, you can really do this to your heart's content. You won't be able to run out of Bitcoin space. Yes?
Is there a worry about some sort of DDoS attack on Bitcoin where someone just keeps splitting, one Bitcoin over and over down to the limit, and everyone has to process those transactions? And so everyone's just flooded with useless transactions processed?
I know there's been talk about that, and there's changes in the code to prevent that. I believe it's called Dusk, and you actually see some of that right here. Error except the memory pool non-standard transaction Dust. And so there are preventative measures against that.
So that was the transaction which was too small to worry about. and so
Probably.
it dropped it. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, we gotta fly through the rest.
It's an app name. Dust.
Yeah. Okay, so in addition to Bitcoin D, there's a lot of other tools to be using on the blockchain. Blockchain Explorer is it's a website and it's an API for querying transactions. Chain, Gem, Blockstream, and BlockCipher all are Bitcoin services that provide access to the blockchain and additional infrastructure on top of it. For example, you get push notifications every time a certain address receives Bitcoin, or a push notification, to watch your addresses to make sure no one is spending it. So if you see something happen, you can just move your Bitcoin right away. Blockchain 2.0, a lot of it is centered on the code that is used inside each transaction. And so that was that stack-based scripting language. What Blockchain 2.0 is primarily about is taking that language and really opening it up while keeping it secure at the same time. So having a Turing complete language where anything is possible, and you can have things like smart contracts, or one of the first ones. And so you could say, you know, when I get paid, call the door and open it. You know, maybe you have an entrance fee. And so you pay Bitcoin to a certain address, and then that address, when it receives Bitcoin, calls another IP address and lets it know, okay, you can open this door. So that's a really simple example. You know, it's really up to your imagination what you can do with it.
Why do we want to Turing complete language yet another Turing complete language?
Why do we want a Turing complete language?
Yes.
Just because you can do more with it.
Then you have to put timeouts in there.
Oh yeah, definitely gets complex. And work on this is a little slower than everybody would like. You know, Ethereum had like, they sold about $20 million, I think, worth of Ethereum about a year ago, but it's still not complete. So all these things are possible, but none of them are in release state yet. Because having it Turing complete is very hard to show that it's completely secure. Because by having it Turing complete,
That's
you open yourself
exactly
up to
what
so
my
much
comment
more.
was.
Okay.
Very difficult is, of course, an understatement.
Yeah, and so right now it's simple to have that security model, easy to verify. But you could have a lot of other things, like a lottery is another simple example. So everybody submits their Bitcoin to a certain lottery address. Every 90 minutes, say, randomly selects one of them and deposits all the Bitcoin that was in there to there. And so you can have these automatic organizations, programs, anything you want really, whatever, when it's complete, whatever you can dream of. Side chains are pretty cool. This is a picture I stole from Blockstream. So what you have is the blockchain running right here. And so you have it stacking up with blocks. There's a peg point where the blocks are pegged with another chain. And so you can run other things, like here's a beta release chain. And so you can peg it so that a certain level of this blockchain is tied to a side chain where they can both then go up next to each other. Micropayments, research and development, it just allows for more chains to be running at once. Other languages, if you want to develop on Bitcoin D or Bitcoin Network, there are all sorts of languages you can use. Here are some of the most popular. With JavaScript, you got Bitcoin developed by BitPay, Bitcoin.js, Python. Vitalik Buterin has PyBitcoin tools, Jeff Garzik, Peter Todd, both core developers. They have their tools called Python Bitcoin Live and Python. Well, that's wrong. You got Armory and C#. You have Bitcoin Lib, which is my preferred library, and NBitcoin. Java, you got Bitcoin J, which is developed by an ex-Googler. Bits of Proof, and in Go, you have BTCD.
Noah, when you said that that's your library, you wrote it, or you're
No,
using
I didn't write it.
Okay.
I wrote like a mono Bitcoin D, like wrapper for the RPC calls, but that is a lot more like fleshed out. You can do hierarchical deterministic wallets, anything, basically. It's kept really well up to date, and it's a full node. Security, you have offline wallets to keep your private keys secure, because if you hold your private keys on your hard drive unencrypted, if anybody hacks into your computer, gets a hold of your hard drive, they can have your private keys and they can take your money. So you can print out your private key, send money to its associated address, and then put it in a safe. And that's the same thing as taking a $100 bill and putting it in your safe. You have multi-sig, so that multiple parties have to sign for a transaction to occur. So say you are signing for a house and you're going to put up like $50,000. Maybe you want multiple parties to sign for that much money to go through. So husband and wife both sign, or say you have a, so here's something that CoinBeyond is working on. You have multiple keys needed to process a transaction. And so one of those keys is with CoinBeyond. One of those keys was with another company that does fraud check on it. And then the user has 3 keys. And this is on a little pin-based device that has a private key on it and never leaves it. Could be NFC. And then you have backup keys. And so you say, for these transactions, they share an address between the 5 keys. That's a multi-sig address. And that multi-sig address is made up of all 5 of those keys. And then the spend from that multi-sig address, in this case, and when you're setting up the address, you specify it. You'd say, I need 3 of 5 of these keys in order for funds to be sent. So this is actually one address where the Bitcoin lives, and you need 3 private keys of the 5 to send it out. So say you're checking out at a terminal, at a point of sale system. You take your card or your NFC device. Merchant rings you up and then says, well, that'll be $15. And so you say, okay, I am, my name. I can swipe my card or use my username. And then use this NFC device, put out the terminal. That transaction data will be sent to your device. So your Bitcoin, your private key doesn't have to leave the device. Then you enter your PIN on that device. It's signed and then transferred back to the terminal and then sent out. And then CoinBeyond and the fraud check service validates the transaction, makes sure it's not happening out of pattern, and distributes to the network. And so this signed it, and this signed it. And one of the ways that's amazing is, you hear about Mt. Gox, they got hacked, people lost their Bitcoin. It was a central point of failure. This has no central point of failure. CoinBeyond gets hacked. Okay, they lost 1 key. Attacker still needs 2 keys in order to steal this person's money. Even if both of these companies get hacked, hackers' funds, or this person's funds, are still safe. If somebody loses their PIN device, again, that's just one. But then they also have these backups where they can load it onto their device and then move money out.
Who's running the Bitcoin software? All 3 of them?
The Bitcoin software, you have everybody in the world running the.
But all those keys are running the Bitcoin protocol.
They're all part of the Bitcoin protocol. Yeah, sure.
Is there any services where people do proxies where they denominate in Bitcoin but they don't actually use the protocol, so that they don't have the blockchain and things like that?
Are there any services? I guess I'd
like
say
you get a
Coinbase.
credit card with a chip on it and you denominate it in Bitcoin, but obviously you're not speaking Bitcoin, and you let the bank do that on your behalf.
I think Coinbase might be an example. So they do Bitcoin payments,
Yeah.
and they hold Bitcoin, but they hold it offline to save money on miners' fees.
Mhm.
And so then if you want to pay somebody outside of Coinbase, then they send it back onto the blockchain. So they're denominating in Bitcoin, but they're not actually interfacing with the Bitcoin network unless they have to. Is that kind of what you meant?
That's a little different.
Okay.
But it's similar that your story. The point is that you don't have the money on your own hard drive. It's they're holding the money for you. That's
Yes.
really what I was talking about.
Yeah. There are services that will hold your money for you.
And will they give, like, has anybody denominated a credit card in Bitcoin?
Maybe.
Zappos, they're issuing it to like just a small number of people. You can pre-order one for free, I think. I don't remember if you have to pay to sign up, but it's trivial if you do. So that basically they reckon in Bitcoin, and they just convert to national currency when you go to make a payment at a regular card terminal. And so because the exchange rate varies, I don't know what it's tied to, if it's tied to anything, but of course the amount of dollars you have in your account fluctuates a little bit.
Yeah.
Because wouldn't it be theoretically possible to run the credit card protocol just in Bitcoin too? Nobody.
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, because they have these new. I mean, the security. I mean, the magnetic is a joke, but the new security is pretty reasonable. But you have to have possession of the card in order to.
The chip, yeah.
The new chip is. There's a lot of problems with the pins and all that stuff, but you do have to have possession of the card. Yeah, I'm aware of the problems.
Zappo card, I've yet to see anybody with it.
It's not available in the US.
The drop down attack. We go back to the magnetic stripe technology. Yeah.
So CoinBeyond is a really cool website where you can do multi-sig. It's a website, but it's also an offline tool, so you can download it, and it's just HTML and JavaScript to set up a multi-sig wallet. There's also to help not lose your keys, because keys are long strings of letters and numbers, and so you can use a 12-word mnemonic. And so it could be like apple, Jesus, bear, pears, pineapples, clock, zing, and that could be your password that you remember, and that then translates into your private key. Brain Wallet is a good tool for that. So that was security. Privacy, that's a little different. By default, people don't have privacy on Bitcoin. Every transaction, as you saw, you can see. You can look up any transaction. Actually, the NSA and the CIA, they love Bitcoin because it gives them access to so many transactions. There are ways to keep your privacy, though. You can use hierarchical deterministic wallets to use a new address every time. And so with regular Bitcoin, use the same address a whole bunch of times. Once somebody knows that's the address you're associated with, then they know where you're spending your Bitcoin. With hierarchical deterministic wallets, you have a root that can then create like 2 billion other keys. And each of those can create 2 billion other keys. And so all you have to do is remember this one, and then you can deterministically figure out all the other ones.
Does it actually give you privacy?
It does if you do it in a certain way.
Okay.
So you can use this transaction, send the change address to the next address, send the change address to the next address. But then you'd really want to, so this is a good way to not reuse addresses. But then you'd have to really combine it with something like CoinJoin, where another gentleman brought up taking one address and its contents and splitting up to 100. Well, CoinJoin is a lot like that, and there's mixing services like it, where people submit their Bitcoin to an address, and then it takes Bitcoin from a whole bunch of different people and then shuffles them around. It'll do it for several blocks, and then you can withdraw your coins from that system, and then they've been scrambled, so they're not directly tieable back to you.
So like dark wallet?
Yes. Yeah.
So coins get lost.
Yes, they do.
Does anybody have a good measure on how often that occurs?
How often that
Is
occurs?
it possible to determine the difference between a coin that's been lost and a coin that
Right.
been
But
There's,
do
I think
people
there's
have
estimates.
that are, and you know approximately.
Like,
any idea of those rates?
I don't know the rates, but I think it's between 5 and 10% have been lost.
Okay.
Yeah. Early days of the network. If you try to do everything manually by yourself, you're very likely to lose coins. Gotta be extra careful with them.
If a coin goes inactive for a while, can you just assume that it's
No.
lost?
Of course not.
Nope.
Someone could just be saving it.
Yep. Could be in, yes, exactly. That's what they're called.
But is it true that the address for, or an address for Satoshi Nakamoto has basically been inactive
Yes.
since the beginning.
Yes.
I was just thinking, what if Satoshi never came forward because just lost, like the hard drive failed and lost all that, and it's just too embarrassing?
Well, it really has no impact on the network. There are fewer coins in the system, but the network and the Bitcoins actively circulating, are really what give value and worth to things.
Yes.
And so
That's how all fiat currencies work.
yeah, and so if there's about, say $50 billion worth of Bitcoins in active circulation, it doesn't matter how many Bitcoins are. If there are less, if there are 17 million Bitcoins, each Bitcoin just becomes worth more. And because you can divide it into the 100 millionth, and you can change the code so you can divide it even further, this number of Bitcoin is quite arbitrary.
For the future intergalactic currency.
Yes. You could even do it to the moon.
Oh.
Doesn't it need TCP?
Well, if you can talk with the moon, and someone on the moon mines a block, and then distributes it to, if they get about a second before anybody on the Earth gets it, and they can distribute it to people on Earth.
Okay. Yeah. Because TCP over long distances doesn't work very well.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe like some kind of laser signal or something.
Yeah.
So if you want to get involved, BIPs are a good place to start and see what's been in development and what the latest proposals and works on Bitcoin are. They're Bitcoin improvement proposals. It follows the style of Python. And those are all on GitHub and online to look at. You can get in touch with the core developers. They're online. Often they're on IRC channels, or you can go to bitcointalk.org and find them. And there's a list of the IRC channels. More resources. I'd say my favorite guide to Bitcoin is this one right here, bitcoin.org/en/developer-guide. It's really good. It goes really in depth into Bitcoin. And it's somewhat short. It's about 60 pages if you try to print it out. Reads like an academic paper, but it's very, very useful and entertaining. Andreas Antonopoulos, he is one of the primary speakers for Bitcoin. He's really interesting to listen to. He wrote a Bitcoin book that's available online. It's called Mastering Bitcoin. But I believe you can also view the chapters online. And then there's also Blockchain University. It's this thing that happens down in the Bay Area, California. But they've also got YouTube videos online. And it's meant to educate people on developing Bitcoin to encourage growth in space. So that's it. Any other questions?
Is there any possible way that you can restart the entire Bitcoin system? So like if China wanted to start their own Bitcoin network themselves, and then suddenly we have like every country just starting their own Bitcoin currency?
Yeah.
Is there any way for them to do that at this
Yeah,
point?
there are altcoins. So Bitcoin is completely downloadable. You can change some parameters in it and name it after yourself. And a lot of people did that.
I don't mean like essentially forking it or copying it. I mean actually taking the code as it exists now and just restarting it on a different network.
Of course, but it doesn't have its value because the whole value is the fact that people accept it.
The only acceptance is the fact that it's accepted in that the people in which you're changing the coin.
Yeah, but in a nationalist
So I mean,
system,
China,
it
if
would
they
make
want to
sense
completely
to.
cut off ties with everyone else and want their own currency, they could start their own Bitcoin and use it internally like the EU's.
But that doesn't fit the use case of the whole purpose of Bitcoin.
Well, I didn't say it had to. I just said that it isn't possible.
Just say we're using Bitcoin now, throwing it out our current currency.
And then you can have an international exchange the same way we do now between the EU coin and the US dollar, and they're all just Bitcoins, but they're all Bitcoins of different names.
Yeah, I think that's possible. The biggest thing probably missing from it is credit. So on Bitcoin right now, there's no credit. There's no, here are dollars that don't exist. I am loaning you this money. Because like with the Federal Reserve and whatnot, banks can loan out like 15 times more money than they actually have. But you can't do that with Bitcoin because every transaction, all of Bitcoin that exists in the network actually exists. And so that's probably where sidechains would come in, is establishing that credit. But yeah, it's doable.
And is there any way to just create a wallet without having to do any of the chain stuff and not use an online service?
That's the having a proxy, somebody else keep it for you.
Well, because I mean, that's going to really inhibit adoption. Because if I'm just standard user A, I'm used to just having a wallet and getting a dollar bill. I don't have to be a part of this financial system.
Well, that's why it would be cool if we could get credit cards denominated in Bitcoin.
But I don't want to trust someone else with my Bitcoins. I just want to create a wallet that someone can send me money to, like a bank account.
Then you have to do this stuff because that's the whole point.
Yeah, it's just,
People were talking about pruning earlier, trying to get around that issue.
well, I mean,
So
there's
you can
people
only
who have
download
no
it free.
concept of how computers even work, and they are going
Then
to
they
want
should
currency.
trust somebody else to handle it for them.
So-
Yeah, but then there's so much level of trust that we're coming into the
But
NSA
the whole
issues
banking
now.
system requires that.
Yeah, so it's a lot like bank. I'd say if you want to look into it, the simplest website for it is probably Coinbase or Circle. If you have Android, we also make CoinBeyond app for Android, and it's a personal user app and it's a merchant POS.
But you're holding my Bitcoins then, right? Is the company that I have the wallet with.
Yes.
And with all the talk we've had about Gox losing money, all these other companies or people you put your Bitcoins into,
Sure.
there's no guarantee like we do in the current financial system. So what's to say that like in your lottery example, I send my Bitcoins there and he never pays the lottery? FDIC does it, your government is backing it and gives you a guarantee. If the bank that you invest
Right,
in
FDIC.
doesn't pay you or give you your money, the government will, which is why we had the whole financial system issue in 2007 where they were too big to fail because the government couldn't pay everybody overnight.
Yeah.
But
If
there's
Bitcoin gets big
nothing.
enough, then we may have an FDIC for Bitcoin, where your Bitcoin accounts could be guaranteed if you have your Bitcoin held by someone else.
And there are actually, I think, so we're a payment processor, and we use Coinbase like a bank of Bitcoin, and they both insure your Bitcoin, and they keep over 97% of it in cold storage. So if they get hacked, the most they lose is 3%.
So, okay.
So it's a lot of, Bitcoin is young. It's 5 or 6 years old, and as a currency, that's really really young.
Still
Especially
got a lot of work to go.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah. But these big companies are building bank military grade security infrastructure to protect Bitcoin, so that we don't have more Mt. Goxes.
See, I'm just not quite sure if I have a wallet and it's in BitChain, everyone has a copy of the BitChain. Why do I need to have a copy of the BitChain to have a wallet?
You don't. You could use another service. Or there are lightweight wallets. Electrum is one you might want to look into, where you don't have to store it with a online service and you don't have to download the blockchain. What Electrum does is it keeps track of your keys and then communicates with IP addresses in the cloud that are running the node, that are running the blockchain software.
But why is that needed? I'm just a ledger entry that's a number that says this number has this balance account. Is that not the way it works?
You need to send the transaction out to the network.
Well, once they're out there on the network, then all I'm needing is my hash key or my public key and the amount that I've sent or that I've started with. Because eventually I'm going to have somebody give me Bitcoins or I mine them. So that means I already have an entry in the ledger.
So you just need to have some interface into this network. And
Well,
so
that-
what is
yeah,
your
that
interface?
can be just me going on and doing a service, and all it does is put my chain transaction into the block system.
Well, there you go. There are services for that.
But again, then I don't have to give them my key, do I? Can I not just give that work to them as a transaction that they then submit into the blockchain?
You can create a transaction and you can sign it, and so the private key stays with you, and then give online services the signed transaction to propagate.
Okay. So then I can keep my own coins on my own cold storage.
Yep.
And so I want to do that transaction.
Yeah. Yeah, I would check out those API services. They do a lot of those. I think even simpler, you might want to check out Brain Wallet. I believe they have
Because
that.
I'm just trying to think of how this is going to extend into the future to kind of mimic what we consider as a cash-based financial system.
Yeah.
I get $1, I can give $1. I don't have to have anything else there.
Mhm.
Whereas this is you're requiring me to have a computer.
Well, the difference
working
is
the chain.
The difference is when you're talking about $1, it's a physical thing. So this is more comparable to when you're using a credit card or when you're using it digitally transferring what we call in our currency now. You have two options. You have $1. You could give someone a lump of gold or whatever. It's all barter, right? Like you could say, I make shoes, and you do whatever you do, and you trade things, physical things. But so we've left that behind now. We're in the digital value world. So you also do that with dollar bills and with credit cards and things like that. But that all has a relevance to the physical currency, even though a lot of people, like you said earlier, the bank doesn't actually have all the money that they have on their books in their bank vault. So a lot of it does exist digitally. So this is just taking it to another level where there's no physical things at all. It's just digital. So you're never going to be able to, there are people who have printed out or created Bitcoin, physical Bitcoin symbols with the, have you seen those? I don't know I don't know what exactly is printed on it, but yeah, the whole point is to leave the physical part of it behind so you don't have a thing that you have to
Yet
hand
at
to
the same
someone else.
time, there is this having that trusted agency that's facilitating or holding on to it for you. That's what you were really more objecting to, right?
Yeah.
So that you're holding your own Bitcoin and you're not having them
oversight.
deal with everything
Right.
like a bank.
Yep.
But having that cash operating bankless.
Yeah, so it signifies that you hold that thing as your private key, that your ability to sign transactions saying, I want to transfer this block of math to somebody else. But there's no physical thing that you can object to someone
whereas,
else holding.
you know, with a bank, sure, they might say that they can't, modify their ledgers without your approval, but they can.
Yeah, but they have oversight. There's other
Yeah.
governments.
Whereas this,
oversight.
the protocol is the oversight as opposed to the trust of the government or the banks.
Except we've seen that protocol fail. We've seen people who have taken Bitcoins and said, sure, I'm going to do this for you, and then disappear off the chain or off the planet.
Yeah, you definitely want to, be selective. With companies like Mt. Gox, there were a lot of warning signs that was going to happen. A lot of people saw it and moved their coins out. A lot of people missed it and they got burned. I'd really say multi-sig is a way to prevent yourself from all of that. Because in this way, even if both of these companies get attacked, your coins are still safe. Even if you lose your PIN device, your coins are still safe.
So where do the coins exist in that example? Are they on my own hard drive? Are they in Coinbase? Are they in the
So the physicality isn't real. It's all on the blockchain, which is distributed across the whole network. Your Bitcoins are never in one spot.
The ability to spend them exists spread across any three of those five.
Yes.
It's a mathematical reality
Yes.
that has to happen when three of those five come together. The ability to release
It's
that
really-
string of.
It's really about the math. And it exists as the combination of the public keys of all five of these, and the ability to spend it requires three of these private keys. And so those Bitcoin exist with the ability to send it. And the five of these public keys combined is your single multi-sig address. And so multi-sig starts with a 3, I believe. And so it's got 34 characters. And so that is your address. And your private keys to spend it, you have different private keys here, 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 and here.
The terminology wallet is actually really unhelpful
Yeah.
It's better if you think of it as a keychain. It's not where your bitcoins live, it's where your keys live.
To get into
So
the
again,
value.
why can't
Yeah.
I just create a private and public keys and then just start saying that this is my address? Why do I need to know?
You can.
You could.
You
Some
can.
other
You can do it
service?
like all day long.
But I need to have the chain, so why
No.
again?
You need to be able to interact with the chain when you want, I mean, that's.
Mhm.
You need to be able to put your keys somewhere.
So is there an app or a version of the download that I can do that just creates a wallet and then works with the chain without having to download 40 gigs or whatever the trimmed version is at this point in
Yeah,
time?
check out Electrum.
But that's an online service, right?
No, it's a downloadable wallet tool that connects with other IP addresses that are running the blockchain.
Okay, so they're a proxy.
But you control your keys.
I have a question. So this is a different topic, but so CoinJoin, when it transfers your value back to a single address, doesn't that de-anonymize the whole process at that point?
That's a good point. Yeah,
Like, wouldn't
if,
you-
if
so
they
what-
know, if people who are running the CoinJoin are known, then it would be de-anonymized.
So then you, I always find it so interesting that people believe, like I have a friend at work who believes that he can buy things with Bitcoin and therefore he's anonymous. And I always tell him, like, the very reason it works is because the blockchain is incontrovertible. So every transaction, what I've told him, I think what you would have to do is create a wallet on Tor through, like, say, Tails or something, right? You'd run Tails, create a wallet, and then you'd have to get the value into that wallet from an address that was also not linkable to you.
Mm-hmm.
And then you'd have to spend from there, and at that point, those would be some kind of invisible address, right? Is that more or less correct,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
or am I missing something conceptually?
No, you're absolutely right. If
Yeah,
you
we
buy,
talked
if
about
you
it.
buy those coins from like Coinbase
and transfer it to your
Tails, well, you just expose.
you bought your
Tails.
credit card number. Yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah.
And with your credit card number, and then so I forget what he did, but he bought a coin somewhere, and he got the wallet on his work computer at the office, or whatever. And
Yeah.
so it's like, no, I think that so also the transactions probably. I'm guessing that all of the transactions' IP addresses are also recorded, probably not by the keychain by the
believe
blockchain
so.
itself, but by the NSA or whatever.
I believe so.
So they would be able to see what also IP address
Yep.
originated each
Yeah.
transaction.
Yeah, if you really want to be anonymous, you gotta use Tor.
Okay.
Unless, of course, they come up with an ATM that lets you convert cash to.
Isn't there an ATM that?
Yeah, go to the Foundry.
Yeah, it doesn't turn bitcoins into cash.
It turns cash into Bitcoin.
Yeah, but I mean,
Yeah.
I can deposit money anonymously into a wallet at that point in time, because unless they're taking my picture or they're asking for my information, I'm putting in cash. No one knows where it came from. No one knows where it went.
Yeah, I mean your legal tax and reporting obligations are the same. Just like when you use cash, they don't disappear. It's
Well, technically, I
It's
think
just
the US
easier
government's
to-
considering it property now, so you have to do property kind of.
I just mean like legally you're still responsible for following laws even if
Correct.
you have the opportunity
But
to maybe
his
circumvent them.
His point was anonymously.
Well, and you're supposed to pay capital gains on Bitcoin now, right? As
Yeah.
of last year.
Because it's property, yes.
So from you're supposed to keep track of the value when you obtained it and the value when you spend it. And
Correct.
Yeah, so if you can use someone like LibraTax, LibraTax, I think .com. I used them this year. They're really nice. You just upload a CSV file of your transactions, or if you use Coinbase, you just give them some light OAuth access into
Mhm.
Coinbase, and they just calculate your tax for you. They tell you exactly, what box you need to fill in and how much.
Nice.
And it's a really nice service. It made it actually extremely simple.
Along those lines, who is the sole entity that is saying the conversion rate right now?
Everybody has their own, actually.
So how does that work with property? I mean, the income tax. I mean, how does that work? If you're supposed to keep track of what the value is at this time and stamp, and then this time stamp, who's saying who's the actual valid,
Well, it's
or I
the-
could just say, well, it was valued at the same price here and here.
It's a liquidity point, so it's based on the exchange rate that you literally got it or sold it at. So there's a value that for a Bitcoin that you paid a certain amount for it, and then when you sell it and get it back into US dollars, that's the second liquidity point.
They're a little tiny USB
It's
based
whatever
things.
it
They're
is that
probably
you
never
sell
gonna
it.
use again.
It's the market,
They might so
basically.
slow, but if you'd like to have one to play
It
with,
comes
I
down to what I value.
wouldn't mind sending you one as
Well,
a
it's
kind of a
not
trade
you,
for the work you
it's
put
somebody
into
else.
Yeah.
Another
This is
person.
a presentation which I found, and also just
And you
thank
accept it, or
you,
what
very
you paid and they
thank
accept
It's the
it.
same with any
Yeah.
other commodity.
Good questions.
Yeah.
In your transaction.
Tough, but
So
yeah,
when
thank
you
you.
buy Bitcoin,
Yeah, that'd be cool.
and you
I've actually
pay
never owned a miner.
$250.
Cool. It's an ASIC.
For
I
one
guess
bit-
it's just a
for a Bitcoin
Sharp
or whatever.
256. That's all it
Then
does, right?
it
So
goes
yeah.
up
So
in
I guess this is
value
a good way
in
to.
the market
Yeah,
goes
great
up
time to
in
contact me.
US dollars.
Great.
And
Yeah, I had
you
a.
sell your Bitcoin
I got a
and you get
USB
500
hub
bucks.
that has the slots
They're
vertical
going
instead of
to
this
see
way.
that $250
You know, so that you can put them all next
was
to each
your
other
gain,
like this.
your capital gain
And then
on
so it
investing in
sits
that
and it
Bitcoin.
mines. I made.
And so they'll tax you on that
$7 in
$250.
6
Yeah,
months.
so
or
you made
something.
money on
But I
the
don't think
investment.
it really.
I'm selling you, say, a cup of coffee.
I didn't see any change in
0.0001
my electrical bill, or I didn't.
That's
It gets warm.
In
but
general,
it's just 5
merchants
volts over
don't have to
USB.
worry
I mean,
about
it
it
does have an
because
external
they
power supply, so I
often
guess it's-
are not
but anyway,
selling
it's negligible.
at a very different
One of the
price from what they accept it at.
Yeah, well, I
and
have a
so
couple,
it is,
but,
it
but yeah,
is
you can run them also
nullified.
use like BFG
So they
miner
go
or something, and
straight
it
from
detects.
when
And then
when
there's
pay
much
your
parameters you can set, but you
they
can access
transact
it if
using
you
Bitcoin,
if
but
you know what
they
you're doing. I'm sure you can access it,
immediately
play with it
pretty
and
much
stuff, so.
Nice. Yeah, that'd be
transition it
cool.
into dollars.
Right on.
There's
Appreciate
no
that.
price
I'm
difference.
Jerome.
And
I don't know.
No, yeah, thanks for the talk. It's
Yeah.
great.
Do you work
you
here?
as the merchant or you as the customer?
I live in Seattle.
You as the customer,
Yeah, and I work at a company called Park Park
that's
Okay.
But yeah,
There.
years ago, I started mining. Yeah, I wish I would have left
I say that
my
amount
miner
per
running because I started
I now go
mining
to merchant A and I buy a cup of coffee. I have to know the value of that cup of coffee.
or
to say
something.
that I
Pretty
spent
early.
this
So I
much.
probably
Well, with
would
your
have
receipt,
hit
your
a
receipt
block
will have the
eventually if I
dollar
would have
amount.
kept at it.
Yeah.
Usually.
But I don't know. I would look in it, didn't look like it was doing anything.
Well,
you know,
usually,
it's
like, if I go to
whatever.
Gypsy
And then I think I
Computer
just
Snaps,
got a new computer
and
or
because
something and forgot
they
about
take it, I just found out.
But
It's
then-
their
and
place,
then-
so,
You can double check.
and-
Yeah, well, I
and
never
in
got.
a
I
sandwich,
didn't.
They have everything
Yeah,
priced in US dollars.
if I would have left it running, who knows?
And
I
you
might
pay
have
with
hit a
Bitcoin,
block. But
it, whichever exchange
yeah, so-
So it's up to the merchant.
then later, I just now I'm more interested in the.
I
like
mean,
you,
they
like you're
they
the just the financial theory
essentially
and,
yes.
and the economic theory
Essentially,
behind
yes.
it.
The merchant
And
sets
there's the
the,
interest of like, who is Satoshi
you know,
and what
they
the
decide
hell
which
happened
they
there,
which
you know,
exchange rate
and
they use. Just like
I-
here in
it's-
town with Canadian
it's
dollars,
almost
some merchants use
like
it.
you could put
know,
Linus
they
and
like
Satoshi
standardize
kind of in
it.
the
Some of
same
them use like a
category
daily
where they
rate.
just
Some of
kind of
them
did this
use like
enormous work
every
and
few
they were
months they
just
pick a
like,
new
you know
one.
what?
It's kind of like that. There's some
Run with
variation
it.
between them.
Let's see what'll happen.
In general,
You
like
know, and then
it's going to be
Satoshi, he had to stay anonymous.
roughly
because
equivalent, and if it's not,
developing
people will
something
probably
this
either
big-
avoid that place.
Potentially
This
overthrow
exchange
so
rate.
many
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
It's
Because
very
it's always
dangerous.
Right.
And
But,
he
more
really can't
trustworthy.
spend his money,
Yeah,
even though he owns so much of
you
it.
know, like a lot of
he really
them
can't spend his money without
use
giving away
Coinbase.
who he is.
And
because
so
people know
for
what
Coinbase,
his
like
address
they've
is.
got
there
an
wasn't like a
exchange
hot
rate,
copy.
Yeah,
and if
yeah.
you're buying and selling
And most people
through
would.
them,
I mean, almost everybody
you're always
would be
using
like,
the same exchange rate.
would do something, right?
Yeah.
There'd be,
I mean,
there'd be-
Satoshi's very
it
smart.
fluctuates, but you're pegging to
Nobody
the same
knows who he
index.
is.
I'm just
And even though
thinking
he's
like
worked
financial
closely
hacker
with
mind, how somebody
like Gavin
could take
Anderson,
advantage of the
one of the
system.
core developers.
Is he still in contact?
No.
He's disappeared a couple years ago, right?
Yeah,
He's-
for sure. I think Gavin Anderson just mentioned one time, hey, you know,
Start creating US
people from
dollars
CIA are
out of
contacting me.
Well,
I'm
I
gonna go
mean,
and talk
as
to
a
them."
merchant, you would have to be writing the software,
never heard of
and we've
Satoshi
discovered that
again.
even with
Yeah.
ready-made
So
software,
is,
it's still
is it
fairly
one person?
confusing
I know there's
for
speculation that
merchants.
maybe it was a few people.
So-
He, she, them, we don't know.
Right.
I can just see the model.
They write, there's clues.
So, I was talking to Reese
Yes.
There's clues.
yesterday at the tech conference.
So the name is Japanese Japanese
totally
for
want
thinking
to,
within the
like,
foundation.
get in on the
Satoshi
Pacific
Nakamoto.
Northwest Bitcoin
But the
meetup
Cool.
and get involved in any
she,
way that I
say-
can
we'll say she,
and
that's what
volunteer
Andreas
and
does.
all that sort of
She
stuff.
writes
I'm really
in
enthusiastic.
That's super cool. Yeah, we've
like
got a
proper
lot of
English
stuff going
format.
on. So
And
we
one of
love
the
that.
other
I guess, what should I
clues
do
is that
first to
always
just sort
puts,
of
she always puts
insert
2
myself
spaces after
into
a
the
period. It's very
have you
like
stopped
precise
by our
about it.
booth?
Like the
here?
English is very well structured.
I
It seems more
you
like
guys were
English,
just setting
English
up.
than
Oh, yeah,
American
yeah.
English.
Yeah, swing
And
by
there's
this
always 2
afternoon,
spaces after
chat
a
with
period.
Reese
Um,
and myself.
That's
So
peculiar.
people are always
Um,
looking at
yeah, join
the way,
our meetup group.
you know,
It's
Yeah.
meetup.com.
I have it on my phone.
/
because people think
PNW
like
underscore
Sasbo
Bitcoin.
could be Satoshi Nakamoto, but then other people
yeah,
like
we've got
debunk it.
a bunch of
you know,
stuff
of course,
coming up,
Nick Sasbo says
and
he's
we'll
not.
be
But
holding
um,
events at some of the merchants who are
yeah,
accepting
people
it,
look
and
at
some
the
new
way people
merchants
write
as kind
and
of
try
a way
to
to like
try to
bring them on
guess.
board.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe there's
Holding
Satoshi
And
Nakamoto.
a
he's
meetup
got to be
event
doing
there
something
and bringing
interesting
people through
now.
the door
I'm
and
sure
like
he's not
walking them
just
through
sitting
the
around
process
watching
for
Simpsons
anything.
or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of funny
Yeah,
because
I don't know.
I've
It might
been
be really
like
quiet, right?
really
Quiet.
sort of obsessive about
Yeah.
Bitcoin and blockchain technology.
Yeah, I listened to a audio
in general.
book
I was having a
about
conversation about Ethereum.
Bitcoin recently. That was
with
just super
Reese.
inspiring
But,
because there's all these examples
and,
of. Do you know
but I have
Bitlanders?
not
The
actually
website
gotten myself a
Bitlanders?
wallet. Like,
It's
what
like
the
a
hell?
microblogging
Yeah,
mainly
it's
a
simply
platform
because I
that
just didn't know
pays,
what to do with it
Mhm.
other than
the
time I
content
went to
creators,
WordFest.
little
Yeah,
micropayments.
yeah.
And
Yeah, it
so there was
becomes,
the
a
particular
lot
example you used was a
cooler
girl in
once it's
Afghanistan who
solved.
was
Yeah,
her
so, and I'm really
her
excited.
entries
I
were
love
super
gypsies
popular
and
because
ginger
it was
snaps.
during
I
the
go
early
there
years of
when
the
I
war
want
there
to
and things,
get a
and she was
cup of
talking
coffee,
about
so
Nice.
what was going on,
definitely
and she's
be,
12
getting
or
like
11 or
for coffee.
something.
Yeah,
So
yeah, it's
they just
yeah,
the founder of the
I'm
website just got super
also
frustrated with
massively
sending
obsessed
money
with
to
it.
her account through
pretty cool.
Western Union
But yeah,
or
we'd
whatever
love-
it was,
we'd
and
love to
he also
have
knew
you,
that her
you know,
brothers or her
participate in
fathers
bunch of
would take the money
All right,
and that
well,
she would
I'll check
not
out
really
what's
get
going on
anything.
on the meetup site.
And so
I'll
at
come
some,
to
and then you know
anything
it's
I
like
can.
Awesome.
somewhere around
Great.
30% tax and fee and everything, you know. So they just decided to go Bitcoin.
Thank you for coming.